All right, it's time for Yogi and the BeachMan. Hi, I'm Jim the Yogi.
And I'm Rick Beach the BeachMan.
We're two Michigan transplants now living in Southwest Florida.
In fact, we're cousins born in 1964, just a month apart.
I like to meditate.
And I like to play bass in a band.
I'm into chanting Om.
And I'm into throwing down some classic rock.
But together, we're on a mission
to promote people that are helping other people.
We want to make the world a better place.
One conversation at a time.
So sit back,
turn up the volume,
and get ready to laugh.
Because we like to have fun
while we spread the love.
Interviewing lovely people. Yes, we have fun.
Where are you at?
I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Washougal, Washington, which is, I don't know if you know where Vancouver, Washington is. I'm a little bit east of there. And I mean, the Oregon coast on the well, Washington has some nice beach too. Oregon coast is beautiful, but the water is just so ice cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was did some travel nursing and I was in Tacoma.
Okay.
So I did swim in the Puget Sound a few times in the summer.
Wow. Yeah.
It's cold.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I literally 30 minutes ago, before I came here, my girlfriend says, "Hey, can we take the cover off the pool? I think I'm going to jump in tonight."
Oh my gosh. Now you're really killing me.
My pool measured out at 85.6 degrees half hour ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
So mine's better.
Yeah.
But I am in the solar pool heating industry. That's what I do for a living.
Okay, cool.
And so we both have solar heated pools.
Yeah.
Nice.
Or else it wouldn't be warm enough to swim. Like the Gulf.
Okay.
A pool here will be within a degree of the Gulf of Mexico. And right now the Gulf of Mexico is about 72, 74 degrees.
Okay.
That's probably where you were swimming in temperatures, right? Or
yeah,
in the
probably
60s.
Probably.
It's you can manage 70s, but it's not comfy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in my near future, when my kiddos are old enough to be on their own, I think I'm going to relocate to a warmer place.
Yes. It helps.
I moved here when I was 35, 3 kids, and broke.
Yeah.
So if I can do it then,
yeah,
you can certainly do it now. So
yeah.
a lot of people down here from there, and I meet a lot of people from out west that have come out here.
Yeah.
Especially California, because even Oregon,
they just
the
want
cost of
escape
living is
and the
insane.
politics.
Oh my gosh, yes, I totally relate to what you just said, Beach Man. I'm from Portland, Oregon. That's where I grew up, and I just saw a beautiful city, just go to hell in a handbasket.
Well, we were thinking about trading you guys like Oregon and Washington for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I think I heard that somewhere. We're going to trade you guys. We'd love to throw in California if you give us BC.
Yeah. It's interesting times for sure. I think we're going to have a fun show.
I do too.
We're going to traverse some rabbit holes, whether you want to,
We love rabbit holes.
I'm the king of rabbit holes.
Okay. Well, let's go. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Yogi and the BeachMan. Today, we are with Floyd Willis. Floyd is the author and researcher of ancient mysteries. He authored the book, The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. We're excited to have you on the show here, Floyd, and all the rabbit holes we're going to delve into. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you so much, Yogi and BeachMan. It's a pleasure to be here. And I also appreciate your audience for tuning in. I think we're going to have a very fun and interesting conversation on giants of all things, and who knows where we'll go from there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited about that. I've watched quite a few videos on YouTube about giants. The Bible mentions giants, so you obviously believe in them because Rick takes the Bible extremely literally.
Me too.
Wait, with a qualifier, the New Testament that I have read.
Oh,
okay.
I'm not Old Testament. I'm not that knowledgeable on it, so I can't go there yet.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, definitely there's a lot of places in the Bible that mentions giants, and if you know where to look for them, you'll find a lot, particularly it's in the Old Testament. And one of the more well-known passages in the Bible, it's Genesis 6, and I'm just going to paraphrase that. It says, "There were giants in the earth in those days and thereafter, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bore them children, and they became mighty men, men of renown." So there's a lot to unpack in that passage, because you have to go who were the sons of God? And what is this talking about giants and then the sons of God having sex with earth women? And then all of a sudden, after Genesis 6, it gets really bad in the Bible because God was obviously disappointed in humankind because there was so much violence on the earth that he wanted to bring in the flood to wipe everything out, except for, of course, Noah and his family. Well, when I started researching about giants, I found what I believe is the backstory to that passage. And it's in an apocryphal book that was left out of the Bible called the Book of Enoch. Are
Oh,
either of
yes.
you or both of you familiar with that?
I am. I actually sent Rick some a video, I believe, recently. I don't know. I sent him a lot of videos. I don't know if he ever watches them,
I do
but
some
on the
because
Book of Enoch.
I had Carrie and I had a conversation about that. She brought it up a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And then you brought it up or it came up in a show or something like that. And so I'm vaguely knowledgeable, not
Vaguely, no,
very
okay.
much.
I'll just give just a really quick overview of that book because there's a lot to unpack in the Book of Enoch. However, I believe it provides the context for that Genesis 6 account. So Enoch was the great grandfather of Noah. He was a prophet. And during that particular time, there was a group of watchers, is what they were referred to in the Book of Enoch, basically angelic beings. And these beings made a pact with each other. There was 200 of them. In fact, even in the Book of Enoch, it names some of the leaders, Azazel being one of them. And they were attracted to the women of the earth. And they must have taken some type of human form and they interbred with the women. And not only that, but they taught humankind arts that we weren't supposed to know, knowledge that we weren't supposed to have. Maybe at that particular time in our development, God didn't want us to have it. Like given a gun and some alcohol and car keys to a 10-year-old kid, it wasn't going to come out very good because these some of these beings taught us the arts of war, amongst other things.
There's
And
also the teaching of weapons, right?
yes,
how to make
weapons,
weapons.
armor, astronomy, astrology, geometry, these different sciences that if used correctly, I mean, they can produce a lot of good, but if used in the wrong manner, it can create a lot of problems for humankind. And
Mhm.
apparently, this knowledge was given to the humans, and we didn't use it for the right reasons. And also, the women started producing these giants, and they were known as the Nephilim. And it's
Mhm.
mentioned in the Bible, that term Nephilim. It's a Proto-Hebrew word. It means fallen ones. And in fact, most of us are familiar with David and Goliath, the story how David kills the giant Goliath. Well, in the Bible, it says Goliath is a remnant. He is a bloodline of the Nephilim. So he was kind of a diluted bloodline, and he was a smaller version of the original giants. And I think Goliath was probably close to around 9 feet tall, between 8 and 9 feet tall.
Mhm.
So there was this intermixing of this angelic beings and intermixing with humankind, according to the Book of Enoch. Then things got really bad. They subjugated the humans. They were waging war on us, making us slaves. Then they started fighting amongst themselves. Also, in the Book of Enoch, it says that they were even corrupting the plant and the animal life, which I think that's a really interesting thing. It almost sounds to
Well,
me
we do
like
that now.
some type of genetic engineering.
Yeah.
And so God wanted to wipe everything out. These giants were destroying everything. And so, according to the Book of Enoch, he brought the great flood to wipe them out. However, not all the giants were killed by the flood. And I think it talks about that in the Old Testament, where it says there were giants in the earth in those days and thereafter. So I think in those days is referring to the days before the flood, and after is referring to after the flood. So there was a remnant that did survive, and we see mentions of them in the Bible, like Goliath. There was another giant mentioned in the Bible, King Og of Bashan. He was an Amorite king. He had a 13-foot long bed framed in iron, about 6 feet wide, to support his girth. So there's lots of mentions of giants in the Bible, different tribes. There was another account when the Israelites were going into the land of Canaan to stake their claim because God had promised them that land, and they sent scouts in there, and the scouts came back and they said, "We saw the sons of Anak, and we were like grasshoppers in their eyes. They were so
Mm.
huge."
Wow. What got you into all this? What got you started, intrigued your mind, and sent you on
Sure.
this path?
Yeah, from a very young age, I've always been interested in ancient civilizations, mythology. When I was younger, there was a very popular program. It was called In Search of, and it was
Hmm.
hosted by the late, great Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah, of
And I
course.
loved that show as a kid. And they had all kinds of interesting things on Atlantis and like Bigfoot and all these types of subjects. So I was the kid in school when I was young that would go to the library and I would look up kind of these subjects and check out
Hmm.
books and so it started from a young age. But what really got me interested in giants was about 8 or 9 years ago. I saw a researcher giving a presentation. His name's Jim Vieira, and he was giving a presentation on giant skeleton discoveries in North America. All these just strange accounts of these huge skeletons being found. And this was going back into the 1800s, all the way probably to the 60s or maybe early 70s. And he kept referencing these newspaper articles that he had found, and he would
Now, when
read
you
some.
say giant skeletons,
Hmm.
I mean, how tall are we talking? Because a lot of the stuff I've looked at, like
Yeah.
they talk in meters. I'm like, okay, there may be 8, 9 foot tall, but some of them,
Hmm.
I just saw something on Facebook today. They were saying in Egypt, under a pyramid or a tomb, they unearthed some like 30-foot skeletons.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I don't know if it's actual or just,
Yeah.
Facebook is Facebook.
Yeah, there's a lot of fake stuff out there, and you'll see a lot of times they'll have the AI generated images of these giant skeletons or a giant
Hmm.
skull, and you could look at it and go, ah, that doesn't look real. In my research for my book, which I spent about 4 or 5 years researching, combing through a lot of these newspaper articles. I mean, I was seeing everything from the upper 7 foot range to average, 8, 9 feet tall. There were some that were just really outrageous, like there was a discovery in Pennsylvania of a supposed 16-foot giant that was found, and it had armor that looked like it was from the ancient area of Nineveh in the biblical lands, and it had a giant sword. And the interesting thing is that it had a double set of teeth, which is
Wow.
very curious because in some reports, articles that I was going through, it did reference some of these skeletons having double sets of teeth. And when you look at the biblical account in the Old Testament, there was a part in there. I think it was, I don't know if it was in First Samuel or maybe Second Samuel, where David and his mighty men were fighting Goliath's brothers. It mentions one giant in particular, and it says he had a double set of teeth, and he had 6 digits on each hand.
Wow. Now, so if they found this in Pennsylvania, I mean, is it in a museum somewhere? I mean, can people research this? I mean, where is this giant?
Yes. So here's the thing about that, Yogi, and and a lot of the articles that I came across, it would make reference to organizations like the Smithsonian Institute. Oh, the Smithsonian Institute's going to come out and examine the bones, or, maybe these will be put on display in a museum at some point in the future. However, every time I heard mention of the Smithsonian Institution, the bones were gone, and they were never seen again.
Hmm. Why, if that's true, why do you think that is?
Yeah, there's some different theories about that. My personal thought is that I kind of go along with there's another researcher, Michael Cremo, and he coined the term knowledge filtration. And basically, knowledge filtration is if a person is taught a certain way or trained a certain way, um, what happens is when they come across new information, if it doesn't fit into the box that they've been taught, they'll automatically kind of filter it out, right? They'll just kind of sweep it under the rug. They'll deny it. They'll say, "Oh, that's not real, that's a fake, because it almost challenges their belief system. And I think a lot of these discoveries kind of fit that theory. And in fact, I reference a particular archaeologist who was doing work in Mexico, Virginia Steen McIntyre. She was dating an ancient site in Mexico, and her evidence showed that this area was inhabited, hundreds of thousands of years earlier than what's traditionally taught in archaeology. And she stuck to her guns. She did extensive testing on these remains and artifacts, and she was discredited. And she published her work in the early 80s, and people just, they didn't want to accept it. And even though she put out all the evidence right in front of everyone, she was ostracized and basically lost her job. And she's been out of the field of archaeology since she published her work. So I think there's a lot of that happens. I know there are some archaeologists out there that know that, like, what we've been taught is not necessarily the truth. And if they were to come across information or remains or artifacts, that if they presented that, just like Virginia Steen McIntyre, their career might just go bye-bye.
How many when I told well, my girlfriend has had me watching. I wouldn't know even the lingo on half this stuff if my girlfriend isn't addicted to watching Supernatural all the time.
Okay.
So I'm picking. It was funny before we came here. I was reading your bio and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even know what a Nephilim was. Am I saying that right?
Nephilim.
Nephilim. I didn't even know what that was till like a week and a half ago. And we're having a talk about it tonight. But so if their kin, so to speak, their offspring are these giants. I mean, her question was, have they been found on every continent? I think we said they've been
all
found
over
in
the world. Yeah, all over the world. My book kind of focuses more on North America.
Okay.
But they've been found all over the world, and that is just one theory that I talked about, the Nephilim mentioned in the book of Enoch, that it was more of a supernatural origin for them, or you can say ET, right? Some extraterrestrial DNA mixed with our DNA, because if these beings weren't from the Earth, whether you want to call them angels or whether you want to call them ETs, there's that
something
line
that came
of
down
thinking.
from the sky.
Something that
Right.
came down from the sky that was not from the Earth.
Yeah.
So that's one theory. Another theory is that could these Nephilim or these giants just be another species of us? There's Neanderthal, and there's all types of new hominid species that they are finding. In fact, one of the more recent ones, I don't know if you've heard of the Denisovans. Have you heard of that term?
No.
Okay, in 2010 in Siberia, archaeologists were excavating a cave, and they found a huge tooth, and they found a rather large knuckle bone and some artifacts. One was a greenstone, beautiful bracelet that had 8 millimeter holes in it that dated back like 40,000 years, which was very impressive to make something like that and to drill 8 millimeter holes in this thing.
Hold on one second, Floyd.
Yeah.
I'm under the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said
Mhm.
this was just dated at 40,000, because this is a couple times I've caught this, and I just want to bring it up now.
Yeah.
That am I incorrect that our current knowledge of human civilization as we know it, right, is like 8 to 10,000 years. That's when they say all this general newer history.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like going back, I think, talking about going back to like the ancient Samaria. Is that what you're talking about? Like
Well, yeah,
the
like
major
from
civilizations?
ancient Greeks and prior, like
Yeah.
how old are the pyramids? Like 4,000, 5,000 years old,
Well,
right?
you'll have researchers saying they go
The
way,
Egyptian
way
pyramids.
back.
Granted, now
Yeah.
you have guys like Graham Hancock
Yes.
who's saying that there's pre-history that we're around two, and there was
Yep.
an advanced civilization way back.
I'm 100% along with those lines. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. There were
So now,
there. Yeah. Go ahead.
so on that note, and I'm trying to figure out this because this is all relatively new knowledge to me because I like Graham Hancock
Yeah.
so it's weird that I just recently became accustomed with this topic a little
Yeah.
bit, so to speak. So now you have, so where would in the timeline, and you have Enoch writing Enoch, 2 generations before Noah and the flood. That to me is pre-Egypt, like probably a couple thousand years, right? So we're
Yeah.
probably talking 5, 6, 7,000 BC.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is what you're referring to, that a lot of people that have a belief in the Bible, they say that's like the pre-flood times. Or they call it, I don't know if you've heard of the term antediluvian. If you've ever heard that term, that basically means like pre-flood.
Okay. And you just
Yeah.
mentioned, oh no, or what was the other word you said? Denisovans.
The Denisovans, yeah. So
Denisovans, okay.
Denisovans, yeah. So this archaeologist found these remains, a knuckle bone and a huge tooth and artifacts in this cave in Siberia. And the tooth was so large that he originally thought it was from a cave bear. I mean, it was that big. So then they did DNA testing on the tooth and the knuckle bone, and they determined that it's another species. It's another hominin species, like upright, walking, obviously intelligent species, because they found these artifacts, the stone bracelet and some other artifacts along with those remains. Now this gets even more interesting because there's been a fairly recent discovery of a skull, a complete skull that is believed to be one of these hominins, a Denisovan, and it came out of China, and they call it homolongi, which means dragon skull. And also, I heard another term called the Harbin skull. In fact, I saw a recent article where this massive skull. In fact, I can do a little bit of show and tell here. I have a copy of that skull, that Denisovan skull that came out of China, and it's rather large. It's a pretty.
This
pretty
is a
darn,
replica, or is
This is a replica. Yep,
Okay.
yep, exact replica of this skull out of China, and you can see it's kind of football shaped. And look at the eye sockets; they're very, very large, and you could just imagine a massive jawbone on this skull, and just how large this individual must have been. And in the article I saw recently, they use a technology to basically show you like what they think like that person would have looked like. And I kid you not, this skull, that once they recreated it, it looked like a Klingon out of Star Trek. I kid you not. You can look this up. And it had a very broad nose, and the big eyes, and just a kind of a massive head. The only thing that separated it from a Klingon is, I remember in Star Trek they had the ridges up on the forehead. It didn't have that. But I tell you, everything else, I'm like, they found a Klingon.
That's funny.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
If they find these Denisovans, and then you said 2 different spots up in Siberia and China.
Yeah.
And would those be considered giants for your definition?
They could very well. Some researchers believe that with the information that we have so far, which isn't a whole lot, regarding remains, but some researchers say they could have been on average height of about 7 to 7.5 feet tall. And that's average. And also, now that they have the DNA sequencing of this hominid species, they're finding it in people, right? Like we know now that the Neanderthals interbred with our ancient ancestors. In fact, most of us will have a little bit of Neanderthal DNA, some of us more than others. But now they're finding Denisovan DNA as well. So if we go back hundreds of thousands of years ago, we have intermixing of DNA between our ancient ancestors, Neanderthal, and now we have this other hominid species called the Denisovans. So what could that produce? What kind of hybrids could that have produced?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Are you familiar with the Rig Vedas or any ancient yogic text?
I am a little bit, and in fact, I talk about the yuga cycles in my book.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's very interesting. It kind of ties into what BeachMan was talking about earlier about these civilizations before us, these ancient
About
civilizations.
the 20,000 year life cycle of the yugas. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
unfortunately.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to share about that or that ties in?
Well, what I learned from it is that in every 20,000 years, like a clock, we go through a period of enlightenment to the
Hmm.
dark ages.
Yes.
And so 10,000 years ago, right, would have been the last time of enlightenment.
Mm,
And that's when they're starting to find these incredible discoveries that, like, how did they do that? How did they have the technology to do that?
right.
Well, if you believe that the beings on the planet were enlightened at that time, they're going to have some sophisticated technologies to be able to do things that we can't explain. And then
Yeah.
slowly we fell down to the lower part, the 6 o'clock of that wheel, and we were in the dark ages, right?
Hmm.
And then historically we slowly moved out of the dark ages, and by that time clock we're actually not very far out of the dark ages at this time, at present day. But
Makes
so
kind
that,
of sense to me.
yeah. And I saw a movie called I think it was called the Great Year. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it talks
Mm-mm.
about the constellations and the yugas and how it all this ties in, and the timeline of the different yugas. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, when I was doing a little research on those cycles, also it talked about during the different yuga cycles, humankind was at different heights, and there was a
Hmm.
time where we were like giants. We were much bigger, we were much larger, and like during times of like dark ages and things like that, it's like the human height is much shorter. So I thought that was interesting. It sounds like in that kind of philosophy that it leaves room that there was giants,
Hmm.
depending upon what the age was.
Yeah, and nutrition. I mean, if you take like the
Yes.
woolly mammoth, for example,
Hmm.
um, on the West Coast in California, the ocean used to be 200 feet lower than it is now. Well, the
Right.
Channel Islands, which is a national park, the woolly mammoth swam to the Channel Islands for food.
Wow.
So they got to the Channel Islands, and over hundreds of years, they became pygmies because the food source depleted. So these giant woolly
Right.
mammoths are now small elephant woolly mammoths, and they
The
found
island theory, right? Don't they call that the
the
island
island
theory?
theory. Absolutely, yeah. The animals just get smaller, so
Hmm.
it makes sense that as humans that are getting good nutrition at some point of the cycle, and then
Hmm.
getting bad nutrition and plights and everything else that has happened to mankind, that yeah, they're going to be smaller.
And I also think atmospheric conditions have a big impact as well. And I believe from a biblical perspective, you go back when it talks about in Genesis, the Garden of Eden. I think the atmospheric conditions of the earth were much different at that time, and it would
Hmm.
support these ages that are talked about in the Bible. Some of these people live in, 600, 800, 900 years. Well,
Right.
if that is true, if you believe in that theory, then I think that the atmospheric conditions were much, much different than they are now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think knowledge plays into that in some aspect as well. Um,
Yeah.
just there are yogis that have been, like Babaji has lived for a long time, and they say he might even still be walking the planet,
Hmm.
because he could create himself in such a way interiorly that he wasn't aging.
Mm. It's interesting. And when you think about the dinosaurs too, the atmospheric conditions were much different when they were around. I reference an article in my book talking about that. And if they were, if a dinosaur was a large dinosaur was around today in these current atmospheric conditions, it wouldn't live long. It would basically suffocate. Like walking around, it would be on top of Mount Everest, with the air, having a hard time. So
Lower
definitely
oxygen quality.
yeah, the atmospheric conditions have changed on our planet, and I think that also has to do with major cataclysms that have happened on our Earth, and Graham Hancock talks about that when he says that a giant comet hit our planet and did massive damage and hit the ice caps and melted the ice caps, and then the ocean levels rose very rapidly, and then which would create massive worldwide flooding.
Hmm. Does that correlate with the biblical story of flooding?
You know, in some ways, I think it does. I think there are some possible tie-ins with that.
Hmm.
I'm an open-minded person. I'm a Christian and I read the Bible and I follow the Bible, but you know, I try to keep an open mind on subjects and there's a lot of stuff that we don't know. We don't have definite answers for.
Hmm. Definitely. So, a lot of your research, I understand, took place here in North America. I think you mentioned maybe where the
Yes.
red-haired giants were in Nevada. Is it?
They were, yes. And the reason why I kind of focused a lot on that particular story is because Yogi, there was a lot of evidence that I came across. So when you're researching kind of a real odd subject like giants, it's hard to find photographic evidence. Very few articles I came across actually had some type of photographic evidence, but I do reference a few in my book. So I like the Lovelock Cave story because there were eyewitness accounts. It's in the Paiute oral tradition. There are artifacts that came out of the cave that you can still see to this day. And there were some skulls that came out of the cave and ended up in a small museum called Humboldt Museum that used to be housed there. They're no longer there because they were repatriated back, supposedly. That's what we're told, repatriated back to the native tribes. So I do have some photographic evidence that came out of the cave. But let me get into the backstory of the whole Lovelock Cave. And
Sure.
that started with the Paiutes that were the indigenous people in that area. And in their oral traditions, they talk about a tribe of giants that had red hair that were very violent. They were evil. They were attacking the Paiutes and other neighboring tribes, and they were cannibals. So whoever they killed, they ate them. And finally, the Paiutes got tired of being attacked and cannibalized, and they allied with other local tribes in the area, and they waged war on these giants that lasted 3 years of fighting. And they finally cornered the last of these red-haired giants in Lovelock Cave. And what they did is they threw brush in front of the cave and they lit flaming arrows. And they gave the giants an ultimatum, like a last chance. And they said, "Why don't you, live as men?" Referring to the fact that they were killing everybody and eating them. They were living
Hmm.
like beasts. And there was no answer that came out of the cave. And so the Paiutes shot the flaming arrows and lit the brush on fire, and it burnt the last of the giants to death. Now, in 1911, there were two guano miners, and guano is
Can I stop
basically
you for 1 second
sure,
before
sure,
you move
sure,
on?
yeah.
About what year is this taking place?
Well, so in the Paiute tradition, the information that I got, this was probably going back in the uh, it's hard to say because in the 1800s is when written accounts of it came out from a
Hmm.
lady named Sarah Winnemucca. And so it probably hundreds of years back before that time. And so I don't know the exact
So this is
year.
basic. So this is basic Indian folklore you got from this.
Yes, Paiute. So that's part of it. So we have the Paiute tradition of the red-haired giants, and then there was an actual discovery in the cave in 1911. There were two guano miners, which is bat dung, that were mining the cave, and they came across. They discovered a bunch of skeletons, or some people said like mummies, and some of them had like very long red hair, and apparently some of these skeletons were very large, and there was a lot of artifacts that came out of the cave. So the guano miners reported it to a local university there, and I believe it was in 1912. So that his first discovery was 1911, and 1912 the first archaeological excavation took place. And then a lot of the skeletons, all the skeletons were removed. The artifacts were distributed to a number of different museums, and the skeletons basically disappear. They were never put on public display. There are very few written accounts of the skeletons. However, the artifacts were distributed to a number of different museums. And then there was a group of skulls that supposedly came from Lovelock Cave and ended up in a small museum. I don't know exactly how they got there. I don't think the archaeologists, gave the skulls to that museum. I'm thinking what probably happened is maybe those skulls were removed prior to the first excavation, which was done in 1912, and someone removed them, and they ended up in that little museum. And what was odd about those skulls in Humboldt Museum is they were never put on public display. They were kept in the basement, locked up in cupboards. And if you wanted to see the skulls, you had to ask the curator, and they would open the cupboards up, and you can look at them. So I do have some photographs of those skulls that were taken by a researcher by the name of Don Monroe about 50 years ago. And there's one skull in particular. It's a massive skull, and it's next to some smaller skulls. And what was so interesting about this skull is that in the upper row of teeth, can you guess what that was?
2 rows,
2 rows.
like
Yeah,
sharks.
2 rows. And also too, there was a patch of red hair still attached to the skull. And as far as I know, there's no Native American tribes that all have red hair. And the Paiute said that as well. But there's been some debate about that. Archaeologists say, well, it's a very arid area, dry area, and perhaps, with them being dead for a long time, they were mummified naturally, and apparently in desert conditions, the pigment in our hair that produces the darker hair just kind of erodes, but the other pigment that produces reddish hair that stays, and so sometimes it can look like it could change someone's hair to red if they've been mummified for a period of time in desert conditions. But even the Paiute said they had these were a red-headed tribe.
Hmm. Now the Paiutes are they're the ones that these skulls went to. Is what you said?
Well, it gets interesting because I never got any answers as to specifically where they went, other than they were given back to the tribes, which
Okay.
I find is interesting because if the tribes did believe that those were the red-haired giants, and I don't know if they did or not, it's like, why would they even want them back? Because
Well,
they're
maybe there wasn't anything extraordinary about them.
it could be. Yeah.
I mean,
There was the
I
one
mean,
skull. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sure they find graves, and well, they do all the time, burial grounds and stuff like
Sure.
that. And
Yes.
and if they're just ancestral burial grounds, that's where they should go back to the
Absolutely. They
whatever
should go back
tribe
to
that
the
would be.
to the
But if there
tribes.
was something extraordinary about them, like they were double sized or whatever,
Yeah.
8 to 10 feet long, then I'm sure that
Or 2 rows of teeth.
and 2 rows of teeth, that would have been something that there would have been like in 1911 when you said they uncovered this. I mean, photography was pretty common at that point. I mean, this
Well, you
and
said you've got some pictures in your
I
book.
I do have some photos of that giant skull that was taken about 50 years ago.
that'd be cool to see.
Yeah.
How do you classify your book? Is it a work of fiction or a research project? How do you
I
classify
tried
it?
to, yeah, I definitely don't say it's a work of fiction by any means. What I tried to do is just present evidence that I found, and just I kind of looked at it like I was writing a college paper, so I wanted
Okay.
to cite all my sources and just put out what I found, and just let the readers take a look at it and come to their own conclusion. So I'm not trying to convince anybody about anything. I just, come across what I believe is, you know, evidence, and I put it out there. I cite my sources. I encourage people, go look and see where I found the information. Go look for yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe
It's
you'll find some other
it's an in
things.
search of episode in a book form.
Yeah, kind of,
But
sort of.
I
Yeah, yeah.
remember that show when I was a kid, and if I remember right, didn't we used to go to like the Wyandotte Theater and for $1 see
Yeah.
there was like a new episode out on Sundays or something, and we go to
Okay.
this dollar theater that we
Oh,
could
fun.
walk to
Hmm.
when we were probably 8 or 10 years old,
Yeah,
and so
that's
early
that's cool.
70s, and watch the new Leonard Nimoy
Oh man, I would
I
have
saw
loved to have
Fantasia
seen it.
there when it was originally out.
Fantasia, the Disney Fantasia.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, cool. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
have loved to have watched those episodes in a theater.
in the
I
theater.
watched them
No,
on TV.
I bet for a couple of years we did that quite regularly.
Yeah, that sounds fun. And
When
so,
your kids before screens, before
you're right,
we had to
before
go
all
see
the
us, go 2 miles down the road to see a
actually
screen.
go to a movie theater and you can get your popcorn and your drink and stuff. Yeah,
Right.
those were fun times. Um, going back to that skull, that particular skull that I photographed, I think I found the actual newspaper article that references that particular find, and I include that in my book. And it was found it wasn't found in the cave, but it was found right in that general area where the red-haired giants supposedly lived. So the cave was where the last of them were cornered. It wasn't like they all just lived in this cave. There was areas around there. So the cave was the last refuge. But in this article that I include in my book, it talks about the discovery of that skull, and it does reference that it had the extra teeth, and it references that it had a patch of red hair on it. That's why I'm thinking it's the same. It's referencing the same skull. And the person that that wrote the article and they examined the skeleton said it was close to 8 feet, according to them. That particular skeleton. I don't know what happened to the body, because just the skull ended up in Humboldt Museum.
Now, where in Nevada is this taking place?
It's about Lovelock Cave. I think I think Reno is a popular kind of landmark. So I think it's like a couple hours drive from Reno. I believe it's northeast from there. Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah,
We're
and
like the
in
middle of the desert, is it?
yeah, yes, and but it was back a long time ago. There used to be a lake there,
Okay.
but now it's all dried up. So apparently, these giants, these red-haired giants, they lived around that area because there was that lake, and they would use they called it tule, which is water plants, and they would make all kinds of things, basketry and clothing. What was interesting is one of the artifacts that came out of the cave was a sandal, and it was made from tule, and it was 17 inches long. And an anthropologist that I was in contact with when I was researching my book, he sent me a photo, which kind of blew me away, of an alleged Bigfoot footprint casting, and he had that sandal fragment on the foot, and like it fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I translated a 17-inch sandal to shoe size, and that came out to about a 29 shoe size. That's a
Yeah,
darn
that's a
big
big
foot. I was
That is.
looking at like the basketball players, for pro basketball players. I was looking, what is the record for like biggest foot? And I'm sorry, but no one came near 29, shoe size.
Mm-hmm. So where does this leave you today? I mean, obviously you're sharing this information, you're getting out in your book and your podcast. Are you
Sure.
still researching, and what are your plans for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still researching because I mean there are new discoveries happening. I mentioned the Denisovan, fairly
Mm-hmm.
recent discovery. You know, who knows? I mean, who knows what the next discovery is going to reveal? And I do plan on continuing to research and come out with a second book. My first book, The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries, it's not just about that subject. I get into a lot of other subject like the elongated skulls of Peru. I get into the little
Those are like
people.
those skulls that are like cone heads.
Yeah, like this one here.
Oh
Yep,
yeah. Yep.
right there.
But
Yep.
I remember seeing in like National Geographic when I was a kid that they'd show pictures of these tribes down in South America and stuff. And they're like, when they were babies, they would just start twisting
Wrapping
them
their
up and
Yeah.
wrapping up and
Mhm.
forming them.
Yeah.
And they'd make them.
Make them grow that way.
They
Yeah.
they would make them, yeah, but and yes, that happens all over the world. In fact, even some of the native tribes, I think it was the Flathead Indians, they would do something like that, or they would take a board and they would
Yeah.
call it cradle
I
boarding,
remember
and
that.
they would strap it. But what's really interesting is in Peru, particularly in an area called Paracas, Peru, um, some doctors have examined some of these elongated skulls, and they are different from Homo sapiens. They don't have, there's it's called a sagittal suture that we have in our skull. It's kind of shaped like it's also known as a bow and arrow, and it kind of curves, and it looks like there's like an arrow, so it's curved, and then there's a suture line that goes through it. Some of these skulls are missing that. They
Mm.
don't have that. So their skull is different, that it doesn't matter if you were to cradle board your head or wrap your head, you should still have the sagittal suture. So
Right.
some of these skulls just don't match up with Homo sapien skulls. And then you have some other interesting things like the Nazca mummies. I don't know if you've heard of those. I talk about those in my book. These mummies that were brought forth from tomb robbers, because that's a big business in South America, raiding these ancient tombs and things like that. But apparently, there was a group of Huaqueros, which are tomb robbers, that apparently came across these mummies, and they thought that they were so important that instead of putting them on the black market and trying to sell them, they gave them to an archaeologist that they knew. And so he started running tests on them, and some of them look alien. Some of them have three fingers and very, very long, elongated heads, and some of them look very reptilian in nature, or even like hybrids, kind of a cross between a Homo sapien and some type of a reptile. So those are creating a lot of controversy right now, and I knew they would. I researched them back in, what was it, like 2017, and I thought, oh my goodness, down the line, these things are gonna, there's gonna be a lot of controversy surrounding
When
these
were those
things.
found?
Those, I think initially, some of the first ones that were brought forward was around 2017, I think.
Okay,
Yeah,
pretty
around
recent.
back in 2017. Yeah. Yeah. So there's still debate. Some people are like, oh, these things are fake. They took animal bones and mixed them with human bones to create these things. And, some doctors have examined these, so it's just different opinions. Some doctors are saying, no, the ones that we're examining, they couldn't have been reproduced. They couldn't have taken animal bones and human bones and mixed them. So there's a lot of controversy, a lot of interesting things in Peru.
Yeah, and I can't imagine, how much work would go into recreating something like that to try to really pull it off. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
why would you go
yeah,
through that much work to recreate something like
yeah,
that?
yeah. And there's always fakes. There's always
Yeah.
hoaxes. I mean, even with giants, I'm sure,
Hmm.
maybe some of the accounts were misidentified, and maybe there were some hoaxes. I'm not saying that everything, is 100% solid, that it's truthful, but I think right now there's like about 14 or 1500 documented newspaper articles just in North America on these giant skeleton discoveries. So even if just a small percentage of those were accurate, we still have a lot of accounts. And then you have things like Bigfoot. Many people have claimed to encounter Bigfoot. Where I live, it's Bigfoot country. I've met people personally that had encounters with Bigfoot. I have a next door neighbor who's encountered a Bigfoot twice, about 40 minutes from where I live, and no one ever documented those accounts. I sat down with him for about 2 hours, 3 hours, and documented those accounts, and he's a very credible person. And there were multiple witnesses during these events. So who knows? I mean, we could have giants walking around to this day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's with all the webcams we have and so many people walking the planet and
Trail cams.
trail cams in different places that we don't find any like big bones or big teeth now. We
Yeah.
find some stuff like you mentioned in China and Russia that's really old, but
Hmm.
I mean, we're not finding anything new and people are in the woods a lot nowadays.
Yeah, and I totally I agree with what you're saying. It's making you wonder. It's like, well, we do have this technology, we do have these trail cams, but there are people that do put out footage, and it's hard to say, is it fake?
Hmm.
There are accounts where people,
Well, a lot
do
of that
catch
stuff is
something.
pretty cheesy and it's
A
pretty
lot of it
easy.
you
It's
can
pretty
spot
easy.
right away.
But
Yeah.
now with AI, it's going to get even harder. I mean,
Yeah.
It is, and that's a scary thing. Also
you
too, I mean, just with the ability that people have to impersonate you, right?
right, for sure. You
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
That's
can't.
very
It,
scary.
Hmm.
I mean, I've got taken a couple of times by crazy
Hmm.
AI videos. I'm like,
I thought you were going to say about ETs.
no, I'm not sure. ETs, no.
You got taken a couple times by ET.
Oh no, I've never been abducted or anything like that.
Yeah.
But so it's yeah. I'm skeptical on the whole Bigfoot thing now
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I mean there's good. they've been talking about that since we were going to the show in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so there'd have to be at least 2 Bigfoot for there to be 3, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there'd have to be a whole little. I mean, it's fun. I like thinking about it,
Sure. Yeah.
but I'm not.
Yeah. I try to keep an open mind. And I was kind of neutral on the subject until I met some people firsthand, and then they shared their accounts. One of
Mm-hmm.
them was an anthropologist who is part of a Bigfoot research group, and he saw 3 of them. He saw a female
Wow.
and some juveniles. Um, and again, like my neighbor, very credible individual. And in fact, when I was interviewing him, his daughter was over at his house and kind of overheard me talking with him, and she just came up to me and just had this look on her face, and she goes, Floyd, after he had his first encounter, my dad was never the same again.
Mm.
And she just looked like, I mean, dead serious, like,
Yeah. And this was
Oh,
in northern Washington State.
This is so I'm in Washougal, Washington. This was east of me in the Columbia Gorge area,
Okay.
in the area called Bonneville. Yeah,
I'm
Bonneville.
not familiar with that.
There's a big dam out that way, Bonneville Dam. If you ever come out to the Northwest, you've gotta traverse the gorge. It's absolutely beautiful.
I imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Now your book says, and other ancient mysteries.
Hmm.
Do you want to touch on a couple of those?
Sure. I mean, I get into many subjects. I kind of touched a little bit about the elongated skulls of Peru, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of interesting theories. And also too, you know, BeachMan was mentioning about these tribes that purposely elongate the skull, and those are
Mm-hmm.
found all over the world. And it begs the question: is why are they doing that? Is it just because they want to look a little different? Is that why they're doing it, or did their ancestors possibly encountered beings that had head shape like that? Perhaps that had more advanced technology, and maybe they looked at these individuals as gods. And so what is the highest form of flattery? It's imitation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, some interesting theories, but no one has can absolutely say, oh, this is the reason why they did that, or aliens came down, or whatnot. I mean, we don't. I mean, we just don't have clear answers. There's
Sure.
just theories about these different things. But I find it interesting that uh, cranial deformation is what it's called, the scientific term. It's been practiced all over the world, usually in the elites of different societies. Usually the upper class would practice that.
That's kind of interesting in
Elongated.
itself, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Akhenaten in Egypt, the famous Egyptian king, the father of Tutankhamun. If you look at depictions of him, he almost looks alien. His head's so elongated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in Africa, they put the rings around the neck to make the neck a
You're
lot
right.
longer. But
Yeah,
isn't
like
that
the
more for
giraffe neck then.
beautification, or is that
Yeah.
could that
I
be?
don't know much about that, but yeah, I think you're correct. I think a lot of those tribes, you know, think that that's beautiful, in their
Mhm.
society that is.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was any thought that they were trying to mimic something, that they'd seen
Hmm.
with a long neck, or who knows?
Who knows? Don't have an answer on that. But I also get into talking about the little people. And in many Native American tribes, they talk about giants, they talk about little people. And these little people, um, they were attributed, many of them, to having some type of magical power. Like, you're out in the woods, you leave them alone. If you mess around with them, don't do that, because they have some type of supernatural power, and they can cause you to lose your sense of direction, and you can end up
Hmm.
dead out in the woods. So
Interesting.
yeah, it was interesting. And
Weren't
oh,
there
go ahead.
just recently? Didn't they just find two very small? I don't know if it's debunked or whatever, but they're
No.
pretty small but full grown beings.
Yeah, in the early 2000s, in the archaeological discovery on the Flores Hobbit. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, they were a race of these little people off the island of Flores in Indonesia, and they were a little over 3 feet tall, and they
Okay.
were intelligent. They had a brain smaller than a chimp, but yet they can produce fire. They knew how to make projectile points and other tools. In fact, at the cave where they initially discovered the skull. In fact, here's a replica. If you can see that little tiny one.
Oh yeah.
So they
And
were
that's not a
intel.
child, that's a full grown
That's full
person.
grown because
Yeah.
they did the teeth that had the wisdom teeth and everything, and a lot of testing.
Mm.
So at first, archaeologists were blown away because they thought, oh, maybe they just had these diseases. They had like microcephaly or some other disease that would cause them to be small. But after a lot of testing, that they determined that no, this was a little race of people, not much taller than 3 feet, and they were intelligent. They knew how to make fire. They probably had some type of language. They probably had boat making capabilities to get to the island where they were at,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Or
they
off
were,
of it. Yeah.
yeah, or off of it. Exactly, exactly. So in the archaeological record, I mean, we are finding some evidence that you can say that, well, maybe our ancestors had encountered some of these little people, and then that's where we get like legends from of, these little people, or like in
Mm-hmm.
Ireland, obviously, like the leprechaun or
Leprechauns or fairies or
fairies and things like that. Yeah.
Elves,
elves.
Elves,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
dwarf,
yeah,
The Keebler elves.
Snow
Yeah,
White.
exactly
yeah.
that. I thought I had heard of some from Central America recently. Are you familiar with anything about that?
You said it was little people that were
Yeah.
discovered.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, but
It
I
was
know
it
I'm,
was probably debunked and not even credible, but it was floating
yeah,
around just a few weeks ago. I thought it was Central America, and
yeah,
these were smaller than 3 feet, from what I
yeah,
understand.
yeah. I know in a lot of the American tribes, they talk about them. There was one I reference in my book. I think it was back in the 20s or 30s in Wyoming. Some miners found a little mummy, and it was less than 3 feet. In fact, I think it was maybe a foot and a half or maybe 2 feet, and it
Hmm.
was mummified. And they blew open a cavern, and it was up on a ledge, and it was sitting cross-legged, and it was mummified. And so these miners, they didn't know what to do, and so they thought, hey, maybe we can make some money off this. I'm sure, maybe someone we can sell it, and they brought it into town, and they got some money for it, and then it was stuck in a window of a pharmacy or something for a number of years, and it was tested. Actually, there were some tests done on it. I think the name given to it was Pedro, this little mummy, and it had sharp teeth, and they did x-rays on it. They determined that it had a skeletal structure, and then I think they even determined that it had some undigested meat in the stomach. And then it just passed from owner to owner, and then eventually disappeared. And so people don't know where it's at right now.
Interesting. Interesting too. That was sitting up cross-legged.
Yeah, I find that very significant, a very spiritual
Yeah.
posture, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Meditators, sit upright with the legs crossed, and
Hmm.
there's lore of superpowers that yogis have been able to tap into. Um, some of them to get small, some of them to get really large.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I mean, there's talk of lore of literally yogis becoming giants.
Mm, interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, what I'm coming to discover, having researched for this book and such really odd kind of esoteric subjects, is that I really believe that the myths and the legends passed on throughout the world, throughout different cultures, that there are some truth, and not necessarily that everything is 100%. But the old saying goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I
Hmm.
really think that the giants, there's something there. And I think
Yeah.
there's something there even in our archaeological record, and also the little people, like with the discovery in Indonesia and other places as well. I mean, I remember there was a guy named Barry Fell. He was a really interesting guy. He was a scientist back in the 70s. He was writing some books. One was Bronze Age America, and I forget what the other one was called. but he was documenting sites here in North America where he believes ancient peoples traveled here to North America. I mean, thousands of years before Columbus, and they left carvings and things like that. And I remember in one of his books, on the very back cover of the book, he's holding up a little skull, and it references, yeah, this is a little pygmy skull that was found like in, I think it was Tennessee or something, in a mound. So
very interesting.
yeah.
That's cool stuff.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah. Well,
It's
Floyd,
interesting. Yeah.
this has been a great hour. I mean,
Yeah.
I just love this. I feel like I could talk about it forever. Yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to say in closing on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you want more information about my book and about the research I do, I do have a website at www.redhairedgiants.com. And again, my book is The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries. You can purchase it at bookbaby.com. I'm a self-published author, so if you are interested in my book, please purchase it there. I am on Amazon as well. So yeah, just keep an open mind. If you're interested in these subjects, check out my book, check out my website, and there's a lot of other information out there online that you could check out.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just one more quick question before we end.
Sure.
So when I go to YouTube and I search for, proof of giants, and you see these videos, do you think most of those are fake, or is there?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of them are. Yeah, a lot of them are. Yeah, again, we had that earlier conversation with the AI and the Photoshop images. If it looks too, crazy, like, the giant 20-foot, 30-foot skeleton, you can pretty much guarantee that it's bogus. Most of the stuff that I would consider giant that I came across was kind of in the upper 8 feet range, 9 feet range. But yeah, when it starts getting really crazy, I would issue some caution on that.
Sure.
And just always do research, check the sources. Where is this
Absolutely.
information coming from? Who put this out,
Yeah. And I imagine if your society or your clan or whatever is, around 5 feet tall, and you see somebody that's like 8 feet tall, they're a giant.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, again, this has been a great hour. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I'm very curious about your book. So
Yeah.
I think I got to delve into that.
Yeah, thanks, Floyd.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been fun.
Nice
Yeah,
meeting
Yogi
you.
and BeachMan, thanks for having me on. It's been an awesome conversation, and I appreciate all your listeners for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Yep.
Appreciate
Have a
it.
great evening. Yeah, enjoy that sunshine.
So if you just listen to this podcast and you appreciate the content and the work that we're doing, we would love your support. Look in the comment section of this episode. Subscribe, rate us, comment. This gets our podcast in front of other listeners. And if you noticed, we don't have advertisers. For the cost of a cup of coffee, you can help keep it this way. Become a supporter right now. We'd appreciate it. I'm Jim the Yogi.
I'm Rick the BeachMan.
Fun.